Right, this is the lesson about genes. All of your inherited traits are caused by a specific DNA sequence making specific protein. A region of DNA that codes for a specific trait is called a gene. There's a gene for blood type, a different gene is for freckles, so a certain sequence of DNA makes you have a certain blood type. A different part of your DNA, a certain sequence can give you freckles, but a different sequence gives you no freckles. Most traits require several genes and are called polygenic traits. So that just means, poly means many. So many genes control certain traits. Skin color, height, eye color are just a few examples of polygenic traits. Really, anything where you have a lot of variation. Those are caused by polygenic traits. So most of our traits are polygenic, but they're more complicated, so we're going to focus on some simpler ones. It says you have about 20,000 genes. Genes come in pairs, one from each homologous chromosome. So remember that meant that you get one chromosome from your biological mother and one is from your biological father. So they come in pairs. Genes come in different variations called alleles. So alleles are varieties of genes. Some alleles or variations of genes are dominant, meaning they can mask or cover other genes. Some alleles are recessive, meaning they can be masked or covered by a dominant allele. Other times they aren't completely dominant or recessive, and they can either both be expressed, which is called codominance, or they are partially expressed, which is incomplete dominance. We'll talk about all this over the next few classes. Two genes together are called the genotype. It says, let's say A is the dominant allele for freckles, and lowercase a is the recessive allele for freckles. So usually a dominant capital letter is like a dominant trait, and then the lowercase letter is the recessive trait. This person has the genotype big A, big A. So two dominant alleles, and we said that no freckles is dominant. So two dominant alleles would mean this person does not have freckles. The trait that results from the genotype is known as the phenotype. So down here, we can write big A, and that would be no freckles. And I'm actually going to explain this a bit more. So let's say the person had a big A and a lowercase a. Big A is no freckles, little a is freckles, but that big A covers the little a, so this person would also have no freckles. What if a person had two recessive alleles, so freckles and freckles? There's no dominant allele to cover it, so this person would have freckles. There's another example. Trait B, and this just shows you like what it would be like. So if this was the chromosome, one chromosome would have a big A, and the other chromosome would have the big A. So this person would have no freckles. Let's say on the chromosome they have two recessive B alleles. It says here trait B is dimples and lowercase b is no dimples. This person's genotype is two recessive alleles, so their phenotype is no dimples. So for this trait, B, since capital B is dimples, if they have two dominant alleles, they would have dimples. If they had a big B and a little b, since big B is dominant, this person would have dimples, which are like the little dents in your cheek when you smile. And then if a person had two recessive alleles, then they would have no dimples. So back to this person, if this was the person and they had two chromosomes, one from each parent, I'll highlight that so we remember that's how this is working. You have two chromosomes, one from each parent. If this person had two recessive alleles, one on each chromosome, then they would have no dimples. Somebody else could have different genes, different alleles for the gene of dimples. So that's the gene. This was freckles, right? But then the allele is like the variation of that gene. So they can either have dimples or no dimples. That's the allele for the gene dimples. The last example says trait C is a completely dominant trait for widow's peak, and trait lowercase c, so that's the recessive, is the recessive trait for straight hairline. So this person has one dominant and one recessive. It says their genotype would be big C, little c. Their phenotype would be widow's peak, since that trait is dominant and covers the other trait. So your options for genotypes are 2 dominant alleles, which is widow's peak. So this person has a widow's peak. Big C, little c, which since widow's peak is dominant, they have widow's peak. If their genotype was 2 recessive alleles, since little c is recessive for straight hairline, this person would have straight hairline. So no widow's peak. And if we look, this particular example, their hairline, that's the gene, they have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. So their genotype is big C, little c, so this person would have a widow's peak.